Chris and I were talking about, we haven't been inside the Magers Quinn store for quite some time, so it's really nice to be here. So this is my book. It's called Honey in the Dark. Just came out in October, so it's quite new. As far as the book goes, it's been around in my life for a long time. So I'm going to start with a poem called Conference Hotel Restaurant, Facing the Ocean. Limp napkins on the next terrace table signal the departure of humans. Alone, I am dismissed as mere shadow in the canvas shade of the canopy, when a fraternity hazing of wings flares in the salt mist over the railing and lands inches from my elbow. The crow allows a pugilist glance my way before turning to survey the wasted gobs of yolk, spit-damp crusts, and a murderous smear of jam on a serrated blade. Beyond sand, another appetite as angry and quiet as any surviving body. The crow beaks a fat, untouched sausage link, cigar thick and half as long. What other reason to pause here? Before my resting hands, a few ceramic pools of sky catch another edge of vastness and push back. Thank you. This is called Earthlings. We attend the weddings of happy strangers. Friend of a friend makes for a convenient +1. We accept all manner of invitation and dress the part. Standing in the midnight shine of our best shoes, we speak with several people we'll never see again. In the candlelit corners of a room collapsed past daylight, this is what it's like, being here, knowing one is less important than the polished rings someone chose to wreathe every napkin. There's little to do but smile and wait for the next thing to go ahead and happen. Our obligation is small, to see the evening through. If we pause to chat with an elegant guest by the bar, what's the harm? There are rare occasions when we turn out to be something like respite to one another. Around here, some doors stand ajar. Past the rented speakers queuing Cool and the Gang, one beckons. Outside, cigar and pine and gasoline from a fleet of idle golf carts scent the air. Like us, night has nowhere else it needs to be. So a theme that has kind of repeatedly come up in my writing for years and years and years actually is the idea of sort of other lives or other possibilities. You know, we all make our choices, big and small every day, that lead us to where we are right now. And I've always been interested in the idea of, well, what would have happened if I had made a different choice at some point along the road, and then extending that idea, you know, what would happen if we could all have multiple lives, or, you know, experience life at a different time or place, or as the color yellow, or as language, or... So there's a lot of poems in this book that play with that theme, including these next two. This one's called Likelihoods, Sequels, and Spin-Offs. There's one where I go to parties, don't study at all. One where I walk off the job. Easy ones where I'm rich and talented, criminally handsome, and very, very funny. The mix-or-match game goes on. The year abroad turns into 2 and 5, then 8. I make all green lights, never pick up a pamphlet. I move a month earlier. The letter gets lost in the mail. I love a woman. I am a woman sometimes. Living in old apartments, my name still on the lease. I learn to play cello. Then I learn to live inside the music of bow against string. I'm happy there, I think. Later, I move to a villa by the sea and polish my little phrases for the grocer and baker every day until the words glow like olive skins. Sometimes I'm carried away by the wind in a dandelion-boned body. In one, a child finds me in the yard, and I lift this nameless, voiceless body into my arms. Eventually, I'm as tall as a bear in the cold, thick on my appetite for salmon, beer, and smoke. A mischief within. Unclasp the flesh from this hour, the hour from its season, the leather strap that cinches me inside this body, this gravity. What could I see once loosened as a scarf that flies in the wind, or a mirror that swallows the slow colors of a violet potted on the sill? The motion and shadow of what we call lives, bowed heads of horses by firelight, and nervous little dogs in the painting on the wall. What I want is to be one of the birds in the margins, longing for absolution, not from sin, from limits, from sameness. My ideas about wings, pipette mechanisms of filament and frost, let them find strength enough to carry my weight from the frame. This is called Guest of the Lacuna. All of us together in a room, and the sun coming in. So strong, it felt as if light had been born there on the floor. I stood and read aloud. A family becomes fossilized, a darker crosshatch etched in hard sand. I wanted to believe it then, after the funeral. And later, after the last dried corners of the casseroles were pried loose and reheated. I don't think anyone knew what I was talking about. We were pencil marks hashed across the white field of those 3 days, clustered at times. Eventually, everyone went back to make some money like the rest of the world. No one disagreed, so I stayed in her house, sat in a few rooms longer than planned. The scaffolding of a week's schedules fell away. Something in me wanted to say, we have not built a life until we rebuild it. Reluctant as I was to face the faint collection of tasks that awaited me in my own city miles away. At night, the late news blossomed in spores across screens. In every house, people stood, backlit inside window frames. The roads mostly empty at that hour, but still, always, a chance to be seen in passing. So this one is, I wrote this a couple of years before the pandemic, but reading it now, given what we've all lived through these last few years, it changes quite a bit, and it should be obvious why. It's called Closer to the Mountain. When it comes to touching strangers, even casual acquaintances, to finesse attention or to emphasize a point, the only permissible way is lightly at the elbow. According to experts, all else is too familiar, because above the bicep curls inward like a mollusk, and too far down risks skin, awaiting palm. So when I reached for you in the crowded atrium today, the gesture small enough to go unnoticed, I was surprised. I suppose it had been a while for me, or maybe it was the strange warmth of your youth imported from another continent, the accent and the silk darkness of your beard. I kept it light as snow, gathering on a shrub, soft as the inner fold of a towel, or the unturned pages of a left-open book. Here is my body on earth in a room next to you, for a moment at rest and without words. A species closer to the mountain goats or wild ponies, pair of bison standing in a cloud of our shared breath, hearts slowing when we draw close. I have just a couple more. So again, like many people, I had an office job. Well, I still have a job. I don't go to the office very often anymore. But another thing that's changed, this is from the days when I did spend a lot of time in offices. This is called Not When the Milk. At the office, when a framed poster declares, if you're not moving forward, you're dying in place, I begin to argue while the coffee brews. By now, the contours of time have delivered me to the center of life, where I have found the beginning of all things. I still march a straight line through weekdays like everyone, but the cliff we're headed toward worries me more than any place I might linger. And so, I think about levitation a lot. Assume a yogi pose with crossed legs, back straight, to feel how much the world radiates outward from me when I'm in this mood. It's a very modern office, with a dedicated space inside for bicycles and tall, unobstructed windows to baptize all the young people calling themselves entrepreneurs. My beef with the poster is no doubt related to another bad habit, critiquing the anonymous authors of signage, ad copy, chalkboards in restaurants. It makes me a bore to everyone discussing the apps disrupting an industry. You're supposed to agree that's interesting. Also, it wastes my time, this policing of grammar and bickering with posters. All words are imperfect. Every expression we conjure has flaws. So is there any use in arguing? Not when the milk pours its cold white into your mug. It's impossible, love, every morning you're dying in place. A completion. This Goldbergian machine may go on, making toast. Air in the bellows, surge of blood to warm the cheek, but not forever. Tens of thousands of cells shed every hour, somehow an invisible loss. Oh, Genesis of understanding, advise me. Announce in me a completion. Call it a sown field or a painting of that sowing. Call the imperfection love and use it as soldering to fasten me forever in the grasp of those I came from and those I came to. The wish to be burgundy and ochre and indigo, as well as young snow beyond the street lamps, never goes away, does it? I'm saying it doesn't. I'm saying my tongue has tasted both iron and snow. And I'll end on this one before I turn over to Chris. This one has a long title, which amuses me. But so the title is Driving in West St. Paul, which is south of St. Paul, but west of South St. Paul.
Right.
Which I had to look up to make sure so hopefully I'm not offending any St. Paul folks. But we're in Uptown, so. What part of the city is this? I asked, suspicious that the GPS was playing cat's cradle with us. It's a mystery, you said, looking past the windshield to a handful of pennies tossed on the road, a disruption of light, along that bluff above where the river flexes against its banks, and voluminous greens arch backs to indigo hands reaching out from the dusk. Not so very long ago, you and I were both infants. Crazy, isn't it? Those bodies became these bodies. The wet little yolks of our souls lived unsettled inside a nest of new ribs. We slept, unaware the runny things would have to sustain us for a lifetime, maybe longer. What did we think? Waking inside this simmer of bright to a world unnamed, wild, endless with brews and flowers, blizzard, chrome, darkness, thick as syrup, heat dance behind the curtain, soured light, and so much beyond reach. Of course we cried. And then we continued on, seeing what we would see, going where we could go. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening. Chris Stark.
Thank you, Lee. That was beautiful. You can do it. No, I don't think you should do it.
It's a very old mic stand. Oh no. Oh. Well, sorry about this.
All right.
Goodness gracious.
Should have left it alone.
All right.
Nobody breathe.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the way it goes. My grandma always used to say, "What are you gonna do?" And I would think, "Well, Grandma, we'll do this, and then we'll do that, and then we'll do this to take care of that, and then we'll do this." And the last few years, I pretty much say that about everything. What are you gonna do? So, thank you for coming out. It's so good to be here, and it's really fun to read with Lee. It's been a long time. We were Laugh the Mentor series finalists. I don't know. Well, finalists, maybe we won. I don't know. I mean, we were there, so we probably won. That's my guess. But anyway, it was a long time ago, and so it's really nice to be here with you and our books coming out, and to be with all of you, and to be here in Magers and Quinn, because what's better? And I'm just so happy to see that the world still exists beyond my block. It's a good thing to know. So I'm gonna read. Is this okay? Is back here a little bit?
Was it?
Is this okay? Like if I'm reading here?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll read a little from the prologue, and then I'm just gonna jump to the back of the book, so that I don't take up a whole lot of your time. So Carnival Lights, it's set in 1969, but it moves forward and backward with the two protagonists, Cher and Chris. They're Ojibwe teenage girls. So their story is set in August 1969, and then like I said, it goes back and forth with their family, and then all their other characters as well. So I'll start with the prologue here. Village of Park Point, August 3rd, 1860. The carnival came to town, but not until after the Indian bones were excavated. Under the red beam of the Minnesota Point Lighthouse, cast by a fourth-order Fresnel lens and illuminated by a kerosene lamp, a motley assortment of Finnish, German, and French men wielding spades and pickaxes broke joints, cracked femurs, shattered fingers, and split the skulls of those buried long before Europeans set foot on the shores of the westernmost tip of Gitchigami. A former John Jacob Astor agent, in concert with the acting mayor of the unincorporated town of Duluth, made the decision to build a carnival to brighten the dour mood of the 60-odd dwelling on the shore and the few hundred in the logging and mining camps nearby. Although it was a hefty investment with questionable immediate return, the two men had plans for the port and needed to attract hundreds, and eventually thousands, more European immigrants to build the city. The two men believed once others heard of the grand carnival held there, Europeans would come in droves. The Europeans were sitting on a gold mine of trade prospects, now that they had moved the Indians off the shoreline closer to Fond du Lac. The Indian graveyard had been a problem, though. The men worried someone might kick up a bone during the carnival, cause a sensation, frightening business to St. Paul or Chicago. So the bones were hacked out of the soil by criminal castaways and thrown into a wagon drawn by a single draft horse lent by a man who used the horse to clear tree stumps from the burgeoning township. That is how the Indian bones traveled to their new home, nearly 3 miles down the river that flowed southward out of Gichigami, the largest lake in the world. 2 days after the removal, guided by the red beam of light, the Arawak steamer brought in supplies, a large metal wheel that hitched to a horse directly across from a wooden bench, such that as the horse walked in circles, patrons rode the bench for 4 spins a penny around a 15-foot wide path. Called the Sweetheart Ride, it was the center attraction for the first ever carnival on the spit of land overlooking Gichigami. 1 month later, after the carnival slogged westward over rutted paths, an old Ojibwe Indian lady living in a wigwam far enough out in the woods that the English, as she called all Europeans, had not removed her to the Fond du Lac reservation yet, walked 7 miles alone to the site of her parents' and her parents' parents' and her parents' 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 graves. Born in 1784, her grandmother had told her one night when she was a girl of 9 that their people knew the time would come when more and more English would arrive, first by ships over water and later by ships in the air, bringing great death and destruction, the Wendigo, the cannibal spirit. The old Indian lady's grandmother told her that the English would make many lights that would guide the ships to the land. One day there would be so many lights they would no longer see the stars and barely know the difference between day and night. All those lights, the old woman added, would make it hard for Indians to see the star people, our guardians and guides, and slowly we will lose our ways. Their lights will steal our people. The old Ojibwe lady, then just a girl, stepped outside the wigwam to look at the star people, hundreds of bright lights in the black sky. Her dog, Animush, stood watch at the edge of the clearing. The moon hung full, just over the tops of the bare tree branches, their leaves the size of beaver ears. She couldn't imagine it, what her grandmother said about not being able to see the old ones. She bit a piece of maple tree candy her Nokomis had given her and slipped inside the wigwam, nestling into the warmth of her grandmother's belly and the beaver pelts they slept in. So, the girls, Cher and Chris, they leave their fictitious northern Minnesota reservation, and that's the 180 pages we just skipped over. And so they spend time in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and then they end up at the Minnesota State Fair, one of my favorite places. Anyway, so the girls, so now they're in the fair, they just arrived at the fair. The girls moved through the city within a city. People shouted, music blared, rides clanged, grease sizzled, and vendors shouted their wares. The world's largest collection of live butterflies. Take some home for a penny, folks. 1 shiny copper penny starts your own collection of butterflies. And hot bratwurst with sauerkraut straight off the ship from Germany. And take a ride on the giant slide, folks, safe for the kids and fun for the adults. Biggest slide in all the world, right here at the Minnesota State Fair. Best state fair in all the world. Yes, sirree, folks, step right up, right here. Take a ride on the giant slide. The girls passed between a 3-story high wooden statue of a Pilgrim woman inside Minnesota Territorial Pioneers Hall and the shuttered booth of Wendell R. Anderson, your next governor. America the Beautiful blared through a speaker from the Wendell's booth. The tinny sound of the song and its relentless repetition pushed the girls across the street to a lit-up sign the size of a living room wall that read, "Welcome to the Minnesota State Fair, the largest fair in the world. 322 acres of fun and fascination. Nearly 1 million visitors each year." A black and white photograph of past and current board members was featured beneath the words. 12 smiling white men in short-sleeved dress shirts and ties surrounded an elderly white woman holding a blue ribbon and a pie. The photograph had been snapped in 1952, the year the board shipped in a V-2 Nazi rocket, displaying it at that year's fair on a plot of open land behind the oldest French fry stand at the fair, opened in 1932. Some on the board wondered about the wisdom of displaying a rocket that had killed thousands of Brits. Plus, news was leaking out about the 20,000 skeletal Jews who died building them in the subterranean tunnels of Middlework in in Nazi Germany. "The man," Chris said, looking at the photo on the sign. "Yeah," Cher said, "a bunch of them, and I want some of that pie." The girls laughed from their bellies, now concave. Included in the photograph was one D.T. Grusendorf, past president of the Minnesota State Fair Board, Duluth City Council member, and Duluth Area Forestry County agent. Grusendorf's personal crown jewel was his 1959 execution of a grand vision he had of a 26-foot-high, gold-colored, fiberglass and weatherproof plastic component Neptune statue to celebrate Duluth's recent designation as a foreign trade zone, which would bring in thousands of ocean-going ships. The Roman god of the sea held a trident in one hand and a replica of a ship in the other. The ship was the first modern ocean ship to pass through the canal in Duluth after the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway, which allowed ocean-going vessels to sail all the way to Duluth, creating an even bigger shipping market for the inland sea port, state, and region, including the increased export of Ojibwe women and children, in sex trafficking, although, of course, selling Ojibwe people would never be publicly discussed in any tourist pamphlets or AAA guidebooks. Grusendorf was behind the push to relocate Neptune to Canal Park in Duluth. Mayor E. Clifford Mork exclaimed it would be a tremendous tourist attraction for the city. Arriving in October of 1959, the statue stood for 4 years a few yards west from the 1860 carnival. Pockmarked by stones thrown by residents, one day the torch used by city employees to remove the statue from its base for cleaning ignited the King of the Sea. The magnificent vision of the mayor and the city council member of Neptune welcoming foreign ships to the shores of Duluth went up in flames, leaving just a pile of ash. The enormous statue burned in 5 minutes due to its insides being filled with paper mache. So I'll stop there, and thank you. Thank you for coming. You want to do a little Q&A or?
Sure. Just come up this way and there. I'll take these out of the way. And then we have a microphone down there for you as well.
Thank you. So in the last part that I read, it doesn't actually say sex trafficking, but you've already, you would have already read the book and understood that's what I was talking about. So I added it in there just so you would have an idea of what I was talking about. Do you have a question?
Yes, I wondered if were you writing poetry when you were a kid? In high school or junior high?
Yes, I remember, in like junior high, 7th, 8th grade or so, I had a good friend, and I sat next to each other in a social studies class, and we didn't really like the class, and so we'd pass notes, and they were often poems. But then I stopped for years and years and years, and picked it up again because I was in a bookstore, and happened upon an anthology of a bunch of different poets, and kind of realized that I had never really had much study of poetry when I was in school, but got interested in it and started taking classes at the Loft and reading more and so on. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Question for Chris. The little detail about the Nazi rocket was really interesting. Was that true? And what research did you do into Minnesota State Fairs?
It is true.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. So it's I started writing this book 20 years ago, and so it's really a accumulation of a significant amount of research, which a lot of it was through secondary sources. But that one actually, I love the State Fair, and we go 6 times a year. And this was before they put in that new historical center with the kiosks. That's those little, I call them kiosks that spin around if you go to the fair. They used to have this little shack as their history center, and all of these just randomly framed photographs were just everywhere, and 3 inches of dust on all of them, and I'm very snoopy. And so I found this tiny little photograph. I mean, I swear it was like that big, way off in the corner, tucked away somewhere. And I was like, what? I'm like, April, get over here and look at this. Yeah, it was a V2 Nazi rocket that was displayed at the State Fair. And I put in the book 1952, but I don't know the exact date because the guards at the Minnesota State Fair Historical Archives will not allow me to see the picture of the Nazi rocket, which they have surprisingly chosen not to display at the State Fair.
Anymore, yeah.
But yeah, I took a picture of it too because I was like, what? This is going to disappear, right?
Goodness.
Yeah, so it's really just like just all these different places that you get, information and knowledge and stuff is part of the book. Yeah, and whenever I ran into something, like it's I guess technically historical fiction, I tried to keep it, true. There was one time I think I had to fudge dates a little bit, or something. Yeah, it's the more you look, the more you go. Yeah.
Interesting. Thanks.
So you had mentioned that the project took you 20 years to complete. How closely does the novel as it stands now resemble the project when it first began?
Well, I started it at the University of Central Florida, and it was just part of a writing exercise in the MFA program, and it was actually a writing exercise based on All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy, and these two characters, Cher and Chris, just like popped right out, and they were just like, hello. And actually, I think those probably whatever 7 to 10 pages that I wrote are pretty much exactly the same in the book. So yeah, it's really everybody's writing process is so interesting, and every book is different, that you write. But this one, it was like that kernel came to me, and the rest of it just kind of grew and grew and grew. The more I grew and grew, and the more I knew, learned through research and whatever, the book just kind of grew around that kernel. Yeah.
So was it the kind of thing where it wouldn't leave you alone, or you put it away for several years and then came back?
Yeah.
How was it for you? 20 years is a commitment, a huge commitment.
Yeah. So there would be years that I either I would just forgot about it. I was like, whatever. And then I actually have an MSW, and I did some primary research up in Duluth around the ships, which is where that information comes from, and that was very troubling and very traumatic. And I couldn't work on the book for probably 7 years. I couldn't do it at all. I couldn't deal with it. Yeah, and then all of a sudden, the last few years, it just wouldn't leave me alone. Get me up, out of bed at night. You got to put in that one last detail. The minor details got to be put in. I just get up out of bed, turn my super old slow computer on, wait 10 minutes for it to get up. Type in the minor detail. Be like, man, I thought it was okay without that, but I guess not. Go back to bed. This is interesting. Yeah. What about you? When did you start yours?
Well, there's poems in here that are 12, 13 years old, and there's poems in here that are from summer of 2020, so right before it got accepted. So, yeah, it's my first book, so it's kind of one of those first book projects where getting that hurdle jumped over, getting that achievement has been something I've wanted to do for a long time. So
Yeah.
it took a lot of patience.
Yeah. That's a good book.
Who would you say are your main inspirations in terms of other poets?
So I really love Jack Gilbert. And there's so many, of course, but right now I would say some of the ones that the last few years I've really loved Ada Limon, Ellen Bass, Catherine Barnett, just read, we were on vacation last month, and I read Victoria Chang's Obit, which is an entire collection that poems are written in the form of obituaries, and it deals with the death of her mother and her father sort of struggling with dementia, which is that was a great book. There's many more I can name, of course, but
Interesting.
those are some of the big ones.
Thanks.
I'd like to flip the question on to Chris. Do you have any literary inspirations that you use? Or
I think Louise Erdrich, would be an obvious one. Turquoise Ledge by Leslie Marmon Silko is just one of the most amazing books to me. I love that book. I totally forget this guy's name. It's like from way back when I was doing my MFA. He passed away. He was all the rage for a while in the fiction world, and he would footnote his fiction. Do you guys remember who that was? Anyway, so I was fascinated by the level of detail and his sort of like messing with form and like footnoting fiction. Like I love that. So that I think had something to do as well with this book, because there's a lot of details that kind of unwind through it. So those would be some of the most obvious ones. But yeah, if you haven't read The Turquoise Ledge, it's a fantastic book. And Susan Power, she's fantastic, great writer.
As you were reading, I was curious about the narrator of your book. I was kind of curious about who that was, and I mean, they seem to know sort of some of the things that you had discovered in doing your research. So I'm kind of curious how you found that voice, or
and so that's a really interesting question. It was something I had some discussions with Deb about too, Toni Morrison, in Beloved, some will say that it was a city that was the narrator of that story, and so that was kind of my idea behind this, and what actually opens the story, just right before the bit that I read first, was the girl's grandfather, Leonard Braun, talking about trees and how trees tell story, and how stories are like trees, and trees are the holders of stories. Land is the holder of memory. So that would be where that idea of that narrator would come through, would be through that sort of natural world of like holding information and holding stories, and trees, trees holding what happens around them in their bodies. Yeah, so the little bit of the opening, kind of hopefully conveys that to people.
I'm curious that you didn't read much about the girls at all, and I was wondering if, what went into your choice of what you read tonight, and why you didn't let us in more on what's happening to them.
Yeah, I think it was mostly just because we had like 15 minutes, so so that was just kind of I that's just really why. Not really a lot of reason. But yeah, the girls I know, right? The girls are really the protagonists of the story, Sharon, Chris. But I just kind of like the way that like prologue opens. There was actually a carnival on that Minnesota Point area. They actually started holding carnivals there in the 1800s, and so I just kind of liked how those two pieces held it together. And if we'd had a little longer, I would have brought in more of that. But yeah.
Also, one of the characters is named Chris. Can you talk about
This is not me.
No, I'm
Yeah.
not asking about that.
Yeah, you know what people do? They're like, "That's really you." It's like Kris, and my name is Chris.
was just gonna ask the significance of the name.
That was just her name.
That's just what came up.
Yeah, my experience of writing this book is really so this is going to sound maybe strange to some people, but I wrote it. Anything that's wrong with it is my fault. But it was more of a feeling of like a co-creation, and like these characters sort of just because what is I think that creativity is the word that the dominant culture used for spirituality. Because the dominant world is so uncomfortable with that, and so that is my experience of writing. Is that it's a very spiritual process, and like in one part of the book, Leonard, because you've read it, I thought I was done with the book. This was a number of years ago, and I was just like ready to zip it off to the publisher, and all of a sudden, bam! It was just like this whole story and character, Leonard, came to me back from the 1800s. I mean, it just like downloaded in my brain, and I was like typing it as fast as I could, and I sobbed for a week. It was so real to me. And so in like Anishinaabe ways, there's a lot more truth to all of that, whereas like maybe you're not comfortable talking about it in the dominant culture because isn't that acceptable to a lot of people in the dominant culture. But so my experience was that these characters really came to me, and I got it down, and then of course it's a co-creation, right? Because I saw the Nazi rocket picture, you know what I mean? But it's just a very interesting process. Like Susan Power talks about her writing experience in the same kind of way. So everybody's different, and it's kind of magical, right? It's a mystery. It's good. Yeah.
Did you explore Ojibwe mythology, or go draw from any sources as inspiration?
Well, I know I don't look it, but I am Ojibwe and Cherokee, and I follow Ojibwe ways. So
okay.
that would be my primary community, I guess.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I didn't include anything in the book that would be inappropriate to talk about, culturally. But yeah, it's centered in, my world, I guess.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, piggybacking off of that, Lee, do you have any particular traditions that you follow when you, I know that some poets only write under certain circumstances. Is there anything like that you follow for yourself in your practice?
Short answer, no. I somebody asked me a similar question not too long ago, and the thing that came to mind is that, and Chris and I were talking about this in terms of our employment and how do you balance being, you want to do your writing, but you also have bills to pay and that kind of thing. And for many years, what I would do is, on my way to the office in the morning, I would stop at a coffee shop and sit there for 30, 40 minutes and just free write there. With the pandemic and being at home for the last couple of years, I've gotten much better at being able to work even though other people are in the house. Whereas before, I weirdly couldn't do that, but I could do it in a coffee shop because it was, I don't know, it was that sort of bubble when you're you put on your headphones and you can be left alone a little bit. There's no laundry to do, or that kind of thing. But,
Nobody's gonna ask you to wash the dishes.
Right.
So I'm wondering, what are your next books? Do you have next books in mind, either of you? Have you started?
Well, the ending. I knew the ending of the book for many years, and I was like, obviously this lends itself really well to a sequel, but that is never going to happen because this is so hard to write. And I'm never going to do that. I mean, anybody could see that they read it, they can see, oh, a sequel lined up. And I was like, absolutely not. Yeah, and like about a month and a half ago, the sequel to Carnivalites started coming to me. So it's been really interesting to see. There were like a couple of things that I put into Carnivalites that I was like, why is that there? Like, that, why would that be there? But you have to follow the story. So I left it in there, and now all of a sudden, as this next book is coming to me, I'm like, that's why that was in there, because that is now going to be this book. Like there's going to be these threads from that book that are going to be explored in the bones, which my publisher informed me a couple of weeks ago that we wouldn't be using that title.
Oh.
And I said nothing because I was like, of course that's the title we'll be using. I don't really need to tell you, of course we're going to use it, because that's the title. So we're done with that.
Oh, no.
It's like not marketable, I'm like, nope. You gotta do what the story tells you to do. That's my belief. Yeah, and then I have a nonfiction book that I was supposed to be going all 100% on, but that's gonna take a backseat to the historical fiction, which I've been doing all sorts of research on, and you wouldn't believe what I found. Oh.
I believe it.
Good old Minnesota.
Lee?
Like I said, this is a first book for me, and so I'm eager to write another collection and hopefully do it faster than this one. Hopefully it's better. It's something I want to do, definitely. Some of the themes I'm interested in are just the theme of quietness, how rare it seems to be to actually be in really, truly quiet places. And part of that stems from my experience of trying to write in coffee shops and having to put headphones on and buying noise-canceling headphones and discovering that noise-canceling headphones use noise to cancel noise to approximate quiet, which is not the same thing. And along with that, a few years ago, I got interested in the Greek myth of Halcyon and Ceyx, and so that I started playing with that because it touches on the idea of quiet and peace and calm and that kind of thing. So I'm a big introvert, and so I think I'm always searching for sort of like calming environments. So I'm hoping people can sort of resonate with that after what we've been through. Well, I don't think you need to keep people. I don't know what time. I have no idea what time it is, but thank you for coming. Thanks for the great questions. Thanks, Matthew and Magers Quinn, for having us.